This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and thank you for joining us here on thetruthcentral.com. We're doing a podcast every weekday. You can join me on X at CorsiJerome1, and on Substack, it's JeromeCorsiPhD.substack.com. We're going to continue a special session again today of the book, The Final Analysis, which is my current book on JFK. It's called The Assassination of John F. Kennedy, The Final Analysis. And what this book does is it's centered around the X-rays and the optical density measurements that Dr. Mantik has made of the X-rays, which show that the 3 extant X-rays in the National Archives are all not the originals. They're copies. They were forged. They're reproductions and copies of the original, in which various things have been added or masked to create the impression of frontal shots. The X-rays also make absolutely clear 2 frontal shots, one that hit at the forehead and went across the top of Jack Kennedy's head, and one that hit in the front by the ear and blew out the back of his head. Now, today we're going to focus on chapter 5 of this book, which is on the frontal shot through the windshield. And a hit, there was a puncture wound in Jack Kennedy's throat below the Adam's apple. Okay, and you can see in Altgen's photograph, I'm going to show you in a minute, that Jack Kennedy was reacting to this shot with lifting his arms up towards his throat. At the time when the shot occurred, that's his reaction to being shot. Now, at the time of the autopsy, Jack Kennedy had a throat wound, which was seen in Parkland, but it had been greatly expanded. And again, we had pre-autopsy surgery, which altered a lot of the wounds. And again, they wanted to make this, the doctors at Bethesda, the 2 naval doctors who were responsible for doing the pre-autopsy surgery, which we've discussed at length, which is a matter of getting Jack Kennedy's body to the morgue. The airplane lands at Andrews Air Force Base at about 6 o'clock. By 6:30, Jack Kennedy's body is brought into the Bethesda morgue in a pinkish steel color, a shipping casket. The body is in a body bag, naked except for a towel wrapped around the head. That's not the way the body left Dallas. It left Parkland Hospital in a ceremonial casket, wrapped in sheets, including the head wrapped in sheets. And that should have been the way the body arrived at Bethesda, had there not been the need for Boswell and Humes. Humes was leading the pathology. They both were Bethesda doctors. Their job was to alter the wounds that Kennedy had leaving Parkland, which were frontal wounds, and to make all of them appear to be exit wounds. Only, all the shots were entrance wounds from the back, because that's where the Texas School Book Depository was when the shooting started. Now, the throat wound was it understood by many, it's very fully documented. Okay, the controversy involves why it looked so jagged when it got to the autopsy table at 8 o'clock, and the gallery looked at this. This was a jagged open wound. Now, we have some corroboration of a conversation that was found by Rob Coteau, who's an author, of a conversation that occurred with Dr. Malcolm Perry shortly after the assassination. So on the evening of December 2nd, 1963, Dallas reporter Martin Stedman, that's December 2nd, 1963, that's just a few days after the assassination on November 22nd, 1963, Stedman and 2 other journalists went to Dr. Malcolm Perry at his home to visit with him. Dr. Perry is the one who did the tracheotomy to try to get Jack Kennedy breathing again. And he was the one who was badgered by the Bethesda pathologists to say that he was wrong to interpret Kennedy's wounds as coming from the front. So Perry confessed to these journalists that he genuinely believed that the throat wound was an entry wound. Furthermore, besides the overwhelming evidence from the telephone calls between Bethesda and Parkland during the autopsy, the Bethesda pathologist recognized that the 5-centimeter contusion at the right lung could not have been caused by Perry's tracheotomy. Rather, the throat wound and the associated lung contusion, as well as the pathologist's reasonable consternation about it, was due to a
This
frontal
is the best
projection,
of Dr. Jerome
frontal
Corsi
shot
on the Truth
that
Central.
struck on Elm Street. Okay, but the pathologist never understood exactly what caused this throat wound. They couldn't find the bullet. The right lung had a contusion on it, so something had penetrated the body, but they could not find what. No bullet was found. So the projectile entered near the midline of the throat at about the third tracheal ring and traveled to the right lung apex where it stopped. A further confirmation of this limited, non-existing trajectory, the pathologist found no deep penetration at the upper back wound. So the back wound had not come through to the front. How do you explain the contusion on the lung? That became a big problem. All right, now the shot that came through the windshield, and Chris, if you'll show figure 5.1 on page 272, it's a schematic of what Dealey Plaza looks like, and you can see that if the limousine is coming down Elm Street, and you can see where the pagoda is. This, Chris, you can point that out where the grassy knoll is, and etc. So on the other side, on the south side, this is over here to the right is the south side of Dealey Plaza. To the left is the north side. And so to the south side, up above the triple underpass at the railroad crossing, there's a whole railroad yard up above the triple underpass. And if you draw a line to where the car is in approximately frame about 222 to 255, through that windshield, you could hit Jack Kennedy's throat. Now, if you go to page 277, the Alchin's picture, and this was first recognized by a gentleman named Schaefer, who was another expert on photography. He was one who first got Roy Schaefer, Dayton, Ohio, was the first to have seen the windshield damage in this Alchin 6 photograph. The Alchin 6, and enlarge that, Chris, if you would, so we can see Kennedy there. Go down a little bit, and there he is. He's clutching his throat, and there's a red circle. Can you see the red circle by the rear view window? There's a rear view mirror right there, right by Kennedy's left ear. That's where there is a flash of light where the bullet is hit the windshield from the front, and it enters from above, aiming towards Kennedy's ear. That draws a line over to the railroad yard on the south side of the Dealey Plaza, and Kennedy's clutching his throat. Okay, now the way a bullet hits the window, it punctures the window on the going in, the outside of the window, the front of this windshield on the outside is smooth. It's like a little pencil point that goes through the windshield. It makes a little circle. You can see it's an entrance wound to the windshield. And then the back of the windshield safety glass kind of shatters inward. So a lot of glass was thrown inside the limousine. And in fact, Doctor, if you're showing now figure 5.2, this is on the next page, 274. By the way, the Texas School Book Depository is behind the car, and when Jack Kennedy is hit. So 5.2, you can see again, there's the picture of you can see this is Alchin 7. Now the limousine is speeding towards the triple underpass. Jackie Kennedy's getting out in the back, and that red circle is where the bullet entered the windshield right
this
there.
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
The picture just above that, I think it's 5.2, 5.3. 5.2, the other direction, 5.2, 5.3, I believe. Keep going. You can see in the Zapruder film, okay, and enlarge that one. Okay, now that's frame 225. And Kennedy's just beginning to reach up to his throat. So it's at that point where the shot first comes through his throat. Something hits his throat. Okay, Dr. Mantik believes it's a shad of glass from the breaking of the safety glass when the bullet entered from the front through the windshield. And then go to the next picture by 2:30. You can see Kennedy is emerging from behind the Stemmons freeway sign, which obliterated the view that Zapruder had from the pergola's pedestal where he was standing. And Jack's reacting more strongly to the shot in his throat.
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
Let's continue with a little bit of the narrative here, because there's Douglas Weldon, who was an attorney for the County of Kalamazoo Circuit Court. He was an adjunct professor for Western Michigan's University's Department of Justice. He became an expert on the bullet hole in the windshield. And what Douglas Weldon stated was that Officer Stavis Ellis, who was in charge of the motorcycle escort through Dallas, recalled actually putting a pencil into the hole. And Ellis claimed that there were numerous people and police officers at Parkland Hospital who viewed the hole. What Weldon wrote, Stavis Ellis, vividly remembers that while he was observing the hole, a Secret Service agent came up to him and tried to persuade him that he was seeing a fragment and not a hole. Mr. Ellis noted, it wasn't a fragment, it was a hole. Mr. Ellis had been totally consistent with his statement over the years and has not wavered in his insistence that he saw a hole in the windshield immediately after the assassination. Ellis, moreover, had a distinguished career with the United States Army and the Dallas Police. Dallas Police Officer H.R. Freeman, who rode in the motorcade, observed the limousine at Parkland Hospital after the shooting. He said, I was right beside it. I could have touched it. It was a bullet hole. You could tell what it was. Okay, now this is damaging the Secret Service. Secret Service is simultaneously getting water, and they're washing out the blood and gore from the back seat. And they do not want people observing that this was an entrance wound through the windshield from the front. Because remember, if Oswald is going to be the patsy, if he's going to be staged as the government's narrative as the lone gun assassin, there cannot have been shots from the front. Not if the Texas School Book Depository was behind the limousine when the shooting started. So we also have testimony from this Evalia Glanges, Glanges, an MD. Now, she was in the 7th episode of Nigel Turner's The Men Who Killed Kennedy, which was a series of shows that really opened up a lot of people's minds about that Jack Kennedy was killed by a crossfire and a conspiracy. And she was a tough lady. She knew weapons. She was filmed by Nigel Turner on the shooting range. She said, this is what she said. I've been handling guns since I was a child. We ran around the side of the building, Parkland Hospital, the emergency room exit, and the presidential limousine was there. I had been standing there just watching the back of the emergency room, and I realized there was a bullet hole in the windshield. I talked to my friends and said, look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield. I pointed it out to them. At that time, I did not know any of the details of the shooting. I was quite shocked when I looked up and saw the bullet hole, but was very clear that the bullet hole went through and through the windshield from the front to the back. I don't believe there was even any cracks associated with the bullet hole. It's like a high-velocity bullet that penetrated from the front to the back to the glass pane, at which point a security officer of some type raced forward and jumped in the limousine and drove it off, even as I was leaning against it, to an area back of us somewhere, and that was the last time I saw the limousine. Okay, now she was insistent that the official story that was a bullet from the rear that kind of rattled around and was, ended up hitting the windshield. She said she thought that was a completely phony story. She confirms that she was 100% certain there was a hole in the windshield of the limousine at Parkland Hospital and that it was from the front. Okay, now, if we go a little bit further, there's a lot of testimony in here about the shot coming from the front through the windshield. And David Mantik did a very good job, along with Douglas Horn, the Assassinations Records Review Board, of really looking at all this data. Now, the windshield's a problem because experts are going to know that was a frontal shot. And so if you go to figure 5.7, this is Douglas Weldon. It's one of his slides. It's on page 297. And you'll see he did a slide showing you what happens when a bullet hits safety glass. So right there, you'll see the bullet enters the safety glass, and then it's the inside, the exit wound of the bullet through the glass that causes all these shards of glass to go apart. You can think about that because the bullet comes in, it punctures, it sounds like a firecracker typically when a bullet hits a safety glass, and then the glass shreds are all thrown at the exit wound. And that's apparent to anybody who knows how a bullet gets through safety glass. And Douglas, he did a great job of showing this. Now, if you go to picture 5.8 on page 300, which is Warren Commission Exhibit 350, this is where they have now a bullet hole that you can see with you have to enlarge that quite a bit, Chris, to really see it. But there's a bullet hole there, and there's lots of little spider web lines coming out from it. And again, that can be characteristic of the way the bullet fractures the safety glass after it's gone through the windshield. Okay, now this is a problem for the Secret Service gets this limousine out of there as fast as they can. They don't want this is primary evidence, another primary evidence of a frontal shot. And it's going to violate the narrative of Oswald being the shooter. So what is done is that this limousine is flown back to Washington, D.C., and it's put in the White House garage, which is not right at the White House, a few blocks away in that time. And now they got a problem. What are they going to do with it? They have to figure out how they're going to change this windshield out. Okay, and there's a couple of people who have had some discussion of this. I want to read you one of the, we did read Sam Ellis. Okay, so there was a couple, let me see, here, Nick Principe, Prencipe. This is on page 285. He was a U.S. Park motorcycle officer. Nick Principe, a U.S. Park Police motorcycle officer, drove to the White House garage on the evening of the assassination. After having a conversation with the JFK limousine driver, Secret Service agent Bill Greer, Greer told Principe that there were shots, quote, coming from every direction, adding that one of them came right through the windshield. Okay, now that's credible testimony. I mean, it's not all the proof you're going to need, but it's highly credible testimony. Okay, and then go to page 291, because what Dr. Mantik found was a couple of witnesses in Dearborn, Michigan, who were involved in the windshield being swapped out. So on November 25th, 1963, the first Dearborn witness appeared. George Whitaker Sr., a Ford Motor Company supervisor, who was interviewed in the August 1993, told Douglas Weldon that he had replaced the windshield on Monday, November 25th at the River Rouge Assembly Plant, Building B. He recalled a hole in the windshield that was 4 to 6 inches to the driver's side of the rear view mirror, and he claimed that the shot came from the front. In other words, the major damage was on the inside, as would be expected for standard contemporaneous safety glass. Weldon confirmed that Whitaker's description matched the damage seen in Alton 6 as initially discovered by Roy Schaefer. So witness first cited this witness in the Kennedy limousine, the Dallas 1963, published in Murder in Dealey Plaza. This was another book in which Mantik also wrote an article, a very good article, on his optical density measurements. And Weldon noted that Whitaker had worked for the Ford Motor Company for 40 years, starting in 1934. And here's what Whitaker's statement was, because Weldon interviewed him at length. And in fact, after Whitaker's death in 2001, his family released his written statement to Nigel Turner, who, with their permission, finally revealed Whitaker's name. His memo said, this is written by Whitaker, the Ford Motor Company supervisor who observed and saw the windshield being replaced, and he saw the initial windshield from Dallas, which had a front shot through the front windshield of the limousine. And what Whitaker wrote is, this is November 22nd, 1993, 30 years after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And as I will be 80 years old in about 2 months, I think it is about time I put this bit of history in writing or on tape. So when I am gone, the record will still be there. This is what I know about this part of the records. I know they are incomplete. JFK was shot and killed on November 22nd, 1963. That was a Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, November 25th, the Lincoln limousine was in the Rouge plant of the Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan. When it arrived there, I do not know. About 9 o'clock, at about 9 o'clock, I was called to report to the glass laboratory, which I did. When I arrived at the lab, the door was locked. I was let in. There were 2 glass engineers in there. They had a car windshield that had a bullet hole in it. The hole was about 4 to 6 inches to the right of the rear view mirror as viewed from the front. The impact had come from the front of the windshield. If you had spent 40 years in the glass industry, you know which way the impact was from. Okay, so Whitaker continued. Around noon, we got it around 2 o'clock that he'd been killed. So right away, they called meetings to find out what they were going to do. We're going to run Monday morning when the president is being killed. We're going to open. We didn't decide on anything at that meeting. And being that I had charge of all power service, I was in charge of getting that plant ready to run or shut down and everything. So they decided that they would let everything ride and they would call me on Sunday. So on Sunday around noon, I had just finished dinner. They called me up and told me to go in and make arrangements to start the plant up, because we would have to start that plant up around midnight to get it going for the day shift and number 2 shift. So I did that. But then I arrived at my normal time on Monday, and they had me on a 2-way radio, and they had me on a Cushman scooter because I was covering a large plant. I got a call from the vice president of the division, and he told me on the radio I was wanted in the glass plant lab now. I went down to the glass lab, and the door was locked. I knocked on the door. They let me in. There were 2 lab men in there, and they had the windshield there. They told me we were to use that to see the car was a special built car. We were to use that windshield as a template to make a new windshield. And the new windshield had a bullet hole in it coming from the outside through. You could see it the way it was broken. But the car was in Building B, where we had a repair garage, and they'd taken the windshield out of the glass plant, and we were using it as a template to make a windshield. We were told to follow it right through until it was a finished product, get it back into the Building B. Told if anyone asked us what we were doing, we're running a template for prototype. And so he said that after describing the process for making a new windshield, he noted, we laminated it, we took it out of there, it was a finished windshield, we took it to Building B, it was put in that limousine. Now the limousine had an entire interior completely stripped out. The carpet and everything was gone. So they stripped out the entire limousine. They're destroying the crime scene. What Whitaker was certain was that it was a frontal shot, but what he became aware of is they were replacing the windshield so they could create what looked like a shot from inside the car. They were making it a back shot. Okay, now this goes on. There's quite a bit of evidence about this in the book, about all the memos and all the confusion over all this, but it turns out that the Secret Service on Sunday, November 24th, 1963, the limousine was flown to Dearborn from Andrews Air Force Base, and one of the executives from Ford flew with it. And then on November 25th at the Dearborn Rouge Assembly Plant in Building B, Whitaker supervised the removal of the limousine windshield and replacement by an undamaged windshield. And then the limousine was flown back to Andrews Air Force Base with its new windshield. And then they start calling another glass company, and they start making arrangements to create this spider webbing as if the windshield was damaged from the inside. And the Secret Service gets it wrong. They have to replace the windshield a couple of different times. And if you see figure 511 on page 313, they were using a ball hammer. At first, the Secret Service didn't understand safety glass, and they just made it look again like it was coming from the front and shattering glass on the inside. They had to change that all around, get it right. And this was another fiasco. Now, there ended up being a second Dearborn witness on the windshield, Robert Harrison, who was an automotive engineer. And Mantik said, during medical school at the University of Michigan, I shared a Phi Chi apartment with two fellow medical students. One of them, Dwayne Harrison, was our wedding organist and had been a lifelong friend. Dwayne's family lived in Detroit. He called his father, worked at the Ford company's experimental vehicles building. And the building, it was right where George Whitaker worked. And he'd previously discussed Dwayne's father's recollection of the limousine. Dwayne had specifically recalled that his father's encounter with the limousine had been a contemporaneous topic of conversation within the family. So what was done was that he contacted Dwayne's family, contacted them, and he went to see Mantik went to see the family. He prompted Dwayne to contact his brother, so his brother's response was voluntary and not influenced by me. Dwayne's brother independently required that his father had seen the perforated windshield. His father had been very upset about this. Dwayne recalled his father telling the family that there were several bullet holes in the JFK limousine. All right. So you've got a lot of evidence in here that the shot that was through the windshield was from the front, and the windshield was replaced, and a lot of the mechanics of how it was replaced. It's a very, very detailed chapter. Now, at the end of the chapter, one of the critical factors is that there were a lot of bullets found. Not just this pristine bullet, but you have a scenario where, a lot of bullets were found on the scene and recovered and disappeared. So Captain David Osborne, who was the chief of surgery at Bethesda, in 1978, Admiral Osborne recalled for the House Special Committee on Assassinations that he'd seen a slug that was copper-clad and fully intact roll out of JFK's clothing onto the table where his shoulders were raised to remove his clothing. Okay, so Lifton contacted Osborne the next year, and Osborne described a reasonably clean, unmarred bullet. He even recalled holding this bullet in his hand and noting it had no blood on it. Upon further inquiry by the House Special Committee on Assassinations, Osborne emphasized that the slug was a fully intact missile, not a fragment. Okay, so what happens to that fragment? So also, Osborne ends up handing it over in the autopsy, and it disappears. Okay, so what you see is that Osborne also found a couple of fragments of bullets, and they were evidently handed over to Humes, and the intact bullet was also described by James Morningstar Young, an MD, as found inside the presidential limousine that night. Young reported that White House Medical Corpsman Chief Petty Officer Thomas Mills gave him the bullet in an envelope after he returned from the White House garage to retrieve the skull fragments from the rear of the limousine. Okay, so the whole limousine windshield story makes it clear that there were a lot of bullets flying around. And we do a lot of discussion to make it clear that all of these bullets that were flying around in the limousine were such that the evidence would have the initial windshield had to be destroyed. Okay, now I don't think there's any more pictures to be shown, but I want to make a couple of comments here that we discuss in the book. JFK's limousine was a landmine just waiting to explode. Too many witnesses had seen the perforated hole in the windshield. Even if a posterior shot had caused it, that would still have meant too many bullets for the 3-shot Oswald scenario. So the conspirators had no choice. At all costs, the windshield had to vanish. Evidence of such a hole, especially from a frontal bullet, would have shattered lives and careers. Too many powerful men were at risk. Surely James Rowley, who was Secret Service, understood this all too well and must have quite promptly explained this to Von Ferguson at the Detroit plant in Dearborn. Once a safe site existed for the secure disposal of the windshield, the Ford plant in Dearborn, where Ferguson was a well-known employee, and only one tight window of time existed for its final rendezvous, Monday, November 25th, the day of JFK's funeral, when the entire world was too distracted. So on Sunday, the White House garage detail was lifted, probably by Raleigh, and Ferguson easily escaped with the limousine that day, probably via a cargo plane C-130 from Andrews Air Force Base. Most likely after landing near Dearborn, he personally drove the limousine to the Ford plant late that night and Sunday and flew back the next day with an immaculate new windshield. Even on Monday, November 25th, the first Dearborn witness was called at home. He was ordered to report to work on the windshield, report for work to work on the windshield. This is George Whitaker, and then a Ford Motor Company supervisor. And it's clear that the windshield, like the body, was a problem because the government's narrative demanded that the shooting be from the rear. There's a picture of how the bullet went through the windshield. It had a downward deflection, and it hit Kennedy's throat. It might have hit whatever it was. That bullet was never found. That bullet may have been one of the intact bullets that was found in the limousine, because it never entered a body. Apparently, got deflected. But at least a piece of glass would have come into JFK's throat and could have caused the puncture wound. A piece of glass could have caused the contusion on the right lung. But again, that may not have shown up in an X-ray, or be much harder to have found in an X-ray. And we don't have X-rays of the lungs. What we do know is that there was no path at the autopsy that was found connecting the back wound to the throat wound. That was just made up, because the necessity was, after we found out that James Tague, a bystander in Dallas at Parkland, got in Dealey Plaza, got nicked in the cheek by one of the bullets that missed. So since the setup had been put 3 empty shells in the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, the government was stuck with all this damage having to be done with 2 bullets. The damage to Kennedy's head, the damage to Don Connolly. The bullet hit Connolly's ribs, broke the radial bone of his arm, and landed in his knee. We've got lots here of documents, written documents, etc., in which everything we're saying is validated. There's a lot of evidence in this book. It's 1,000 footnotes, 564-page book with a lot of appendices. The science is in the appendices. Now that I want to focus on that for a minute. That's a shot of looking at the bridge above the Texas, above the triple underpass on the south side of Dealey Plaza. And Chris, I want you to go to one of the appendices at the very back. It's a special appendix. It is at page, let me find it here. It is at page 439. Now, Brian Edwards, who did a lot of work with some of the witnesses in Dealey Plaza, did a slideshow, and he said, was there a shooter on top of the triple underpass? Now, Chris, enlarge these so we can really see them. That's good. And go to the next picture. You can see these red lines are from the span of the concrete bridge at the top of the triple underpass on the south side of Dealey Plaza to where shot Z222 approximately, where the Kennedy was hit in the neck, and go to the next slide, you can begin to see what this angle looks like. See, that's where the car would have been, that's where the car is coming down Elm Street. Okay, and now go to the next view, and you can see the shot to that point from the bridge. So it would have come through just to the left of the rear view mirror on the front windshield and would have crossed over to hit Jack Kennedy, which is what it was aimed for. Okay, now just a couple more show you the shooter's path. Just a couple more of these slides, kind of just make it really clear what the path looks like from an view of up above, and keep going. Okay, now, and there's another view of the shot from the railroad yard on the triple above Dealey Plaza on the triple underpass, on the top of the triple underpass. Keep going. There's some Dillard photographs. Dillard was one of the photographers with the press. He started taking a bunch of photographs. Okay, and photograph number 9, you can begin seeing there's something blocking the light between the pillars in this spot. If you can enlarge that just a little bit more, it might be possible to see it and come down. Come down a little bit. There we go. Keep going down. Right there. Keep going down. You can see there's something blocking there. Okay, now go to frame number 11, picture number 11, which is an extreme close-up. Yeah, that's again what we're looking at. Go right there. Okay, so during the Dillard photograph, there is somebody there. There's something behind that fence, right there, behind that concrete fence. Okay, and go also to figure number 13. And again, that one more down, I think that's 12. Go to 13. Again, you can see there is somebody there. A picture of that fence when there's nobody there. It looks very different. Okay, the next couple of pictures, you can see where that is on the bridge, the overpass. Of course, the railroad observers who were on that same elevated part of the triple underpass were down at the other side. They weren't watching this corner, the distant corner of the railroad yard. They were watching Kennedy's car. So whoever was there was not observed, but shows up in the photographic evidence. Now, these are the kinds of things that, again, make clear that the Warren Commission was lying. Jack Kennedy was shot by multiple shooters. This is the best description we've given you of the shooter who on the south side of the yard of the Dealey Plaza, up above the triple underpass. The shooter on the grassy knoll who shot the last shot, this is the first shot, which hit the throat. Probably shrapnel hit the back from a shot that missed on Elm Street. And that's the Chancellery picture, which also gives you a good view of that triple underpass section of the railroad yard up above by that concrete fence. At any rate, and again, it's tough to find figures in these because, again, they're just 35 millimeter negatives and they weren't terribly detailed. They're not like digital photographs. They don't have all the pixel information. Negatives were much less precise. They couldn't contain as much information. And so if there were 3 shooters and one a low angle behind in the Daltex building, what happened, it looks like the sequence of the shots, was the first shot, which hit Jack Kennedy at frame 313. His head's moving forward. You get debris coming out of the front of the head. And then a few frames later, about 2 seconds later, frame 331, Jack Kennedy is hit. His head explodes by the temple here, literally explodes. And the back of his head blown out, and he's thrown violently to the left and back into the seat. So the shot to the temple could have occurred in between those shots or simultaneously with one of those shots. And it's tough to see whether there was another shooter on the grassy knoll or whether, in fact, that was a shot from the shooter on the south side of Dealey Plaza. But what we know is that there were 3 shots that hit the head. 2 were from the front. We know the windshield was shot from the front and was replaced. This is extremely damaging information to anyone wanting maintaining that Jack Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. That's the critical point of this presentation. And the book, The Final Analysis, is the final analysis. The Assassination of John F. Kennedy, the final analysis. And the final analysis is taken from a speech that Jack Kennedy gave at American University, where he said in the final analysis, so it was after the Cuban Missile Crisis and just before he died, final analysis, we all live in this small planet and we are all mortal. Jack Kennedy was a peacemaker. He did not want to go to war. He was killed because he stood in the way of the Vietnam War. He had blocked going to war. The Cuban Missile Crisis, our military desperately wanted to go to war. Billions of dollars being made. November 22nd, 1963 was a coup d'etat. The day the deep state came out in the open, lied about it, covered it up with psychological operations, lasted until today. Very clever psychological operation, which the last memo in this book, the last appendix, a memo from the CIA from 1967, instructing the CIA's official policy to take anyone criticizing the Warren Report and run a psychological operation to muddy their evidence and discredit their credibility. The idea of conspiracy theorist was born to cover up the CIA's coup d'etat and lie. Deep state is running the country, which is obvious today. They finally got a president who's suffering such senior dementia, the special prosecutor wouldn't indict him for misusing classified information as vice president, yet he's running the country. Well, if you're the deep state running the country from behind the curtain, you don't want a president who's making any decisions. You better just have an AI president or robot. Well, they got the next best thing. They got someone, Joe Biden, who's suffering senior dementia, and he'll do what he's told, and they'll prop him up with enough drugs to get him through the experience. He's not running the country. The deep state, CIA, military-industrial complex, lying press. And this opens up the argument, how many lies have we been told? Why did buildings in 9/11 go down that were not hit by airplanes? What was the Tonkin Gulf all about? Lead up to the Vietnam War. Obviously, an incident that was again made up, and that was demonstrated very convincingly. Where were the weapons of mass destruction when we were raided into Iraq to go after Saddam Hussein in 1991? This is a very compelling, game-changing book. And in the end, God will always win. God will win here too. The truth is coming out. Anyone reading this book can no longer be under the illusion that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Jack Kennedy. And you can see how the evidence was changed. It fits together now. The government's evidence doesn't fit together because the government's lying. We make that point abundantly clear. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. We'll be back. Join me in, I think, the solution the Bible gives, which is 2 Chronicles 7:14. Let's get on our knees and repent. We let so many babies be killed in the womb after Roe v. Wade, and the Democrats are going to run on that theme, wanting to kill more babies, calling it the right of a woman to choose. Satan does not rule the earth. God is sovereign. God will win. God has already won. Satan's losing. People are waking up. There will be a great awakening. This could be one of the most important moments in human history. Dr. Jerome Corsi, thank you for joining us. God bless.
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.